The air in the small, fiercely Catholic town of Klingenberg am Main, nestled deep within the rolling hills of Bavaria, felt thick and unforgiving on that humid summer morning. It was a stifling shroud draped over reality, the kind of heat that promises death, not life. The skeletal architecture of the young woman lying lifeless in her bedroom was the only testament needed to the unimaginable horror that had transpired within those walls, hidden behind the facade of devout respectability. Her name was Anneliese Michel, and she was, at 23 years old, an atrocity made flesh, a monument to famine and fear. Her body, weighing a mere 68 pounds, was bruised, battered, and marked by self-inflicted wounds that testified not just to pain, but to a profound, sustained warfare waged against her own humanity. The joints were swollen, her lungs rigid with pneumonia, and the contorted expression frozen upon her face was not one of peace, but of ultimate terrifying exhaustion. The stench that clung to the linen, a miasma of decay, neglect, and the unmistakable metallic tang of sustained human suffering told a story the local police were not equipped to comprehend, a narrative that defied medical textbooks and plunged headlong into the darkest chasms of faith and fanaticism. This was not the quiet passing of a loved one. This was the brutal, protracted execution of a soul, delivered not by external malice, but by the relentless, unquestioning adherence to a belief system twisted into a weapon. This was not merely negligence. It was a devastating collision between modern medicine and medieval conviction, a catastrophic failure that would ultimately drag a priest, a school teacher, and two deeply pious parents into the brutal, unblinking spotlight of the German legal system. The central, agonizing question, the terrifying axis upon which this entire tragedy turned, was agonizingly simple. Was this young woman a victim of uncontrollable, refractory neurological and psychological illness, a casualty of grand mal epilepsy and severe temporal lobe psychosis, or was she, as her family and two authorized servants of the church ultimately declared, the battlefield for 6 distinct viciously possessing demons? The answer, measured in her terminal starvation and the 42 specific rites of exorcism performed upon her, remains one of the most chilling and divisive legacies in modern Western history. To understand the dreadful trajectory of Anneliese Michel, one must first grasp the fervent, suffocating piety of her environment. Born in 1952, she grew up in an atmosphere saturated with Catholicism so rigorous it bordered on asceticism. Her father was a deeply religious man, and her mother, Anna, was known locally for her near-obsessive devotion to the church, compensating perhaps for an illegitimate child she had borne years earlier, now deceased, an act that haunted the family with lingering shame and the need for ceaseless atonement. Anneliese herself was molded into an exemplar of devout femininity, quiet, intensely serious, often sleeping on the bare floor in winter as an act of penance, and possessing a deep, unwavering commitment to the Virgin Mary. This foundation of intense spiritual rigor was the fertile ground upon which the seed of her torment would later take root and bloom into something monstrous. The shift, the moment the light began to dim, occurred quietly, subtly, in the year 1968, shortly after her 16th birthday. The initial manifestations were physical, terrifying, and distinctly neurological. While attempting to stand one night, Anneliese experienced a sudden, profound rigidity of her entire body, a paralysis that lasted for an agonizing eternity before she collapsed, trembling violently, unable to call for help. When the attacks recurred with increasing severity, characterized by staring spells, frothing at the mouth, and terrifying clonic movements, the medical community offered a clear clinical diagnosis: grand mal epilepsy, a severe seizure disorder often linked to the temporal lobe of the brain. She was hospitalized, beginning a grueling regime of psychiatric medications, including phenytoin, carbamazepine, and later the potent neuroleptic Aiola, designed to control the convulsions and the increasingly frequent bouts of mood disturbance and paranoia that accompanied them. For a time, the pharmaceutical intervention offered brief, fleeting reprieves, mere islands of clarity in a rising tide of confusion. But as 1970 turned into 1973, the illness deepened its insidious grip, refusing to be contained by pharmacology alone. Anneliese's psychological state began a precipitous decline, marked by symptoms that began to defy purely medical categorization. Crucially, symptoms that the rigidly faithful family refused to interpret as mere biology. She began to complain of seeing demonic, hideous faces during her daily prayers, visages that would snarl and mock her devotion. A growing intolerance, visceral physical rejection of religious objects started manifesting. She could no longer tolerate the sight of a crucifix. The touch of holy water would elicit a panicked shriek, and walking past a grotto consecrated to the Virgin Mary became an impossibility, triggering sudden uncontrollable spasms and fits of agonizing rage. The conflict escalated rapidly, establishing the tension that would define the rest of her short life. On the one hand, sophisticated German medicine continued to administer powerful psychotropic drugs, attempting to quiet the electrical storm in her brain. On the other hand, the deep-seated theological fear of the Michel family and their immediate community solidified their conviction. The doctors were treating the symptoms but ignoring the cause. How could mere disease explain the specific, targeted violence against sacred symbols? How could epilepsy account for the sudden, guttural change in her voice, often dropping several octaves into a gravelly alien tone, speaking in languages she had never studied, uttering blasphemies too vile to repeat? The family's distress reached a critical mass when Anneliese began displaying behaviors that were not just violent, but overtly self-destructive and terrifyingly ritualistic. She would tear her clothing, eat spiders and coal directly from the hearth, and lick her own urine off the floor, all the while emitting a terrifying symphony of high-pitched shrieks, low growls and mocking laughter that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within her chest cavity, utterly disconnected from the gentle voice they knew. This sustained, relentless deterioration, the pattern interrupts where medicine would fail only to be supplanted by increasingly bizarre spiritual symptoms forced the hand of the desperate parents. They sought help not just from their local parish priest, Pastor Ernst Out, but also from the elder pastor Arnold Renz, a man known for his conservative views and belief in the reality of demonic possession. When medical treatments proved utterly incapable of staunching the flow of bile and profanity that poured from Anneliese's mouth, especially when confronted with the Eucharist, the local clergy began their own terrifying diagnosis. They observed the distinct asterisk XENOGLOS asterisk, speaking in unknown tongues, usually Latin or ancient German, the superhuman strength displayed during her fits, requiring multiple strong men to restrain her, and the precise theological knowledge she seemed to possess about the sins of those around her, reached with fearful certainty by the summer of 1975, was devastating. Anneliese Michel was not merely ill. She was possessed. She was the chosen yet unwilling vessel for multiple demonic entities, potentially Lucifer himself. The decision was formalized, marking the absolute closure of the medical chapter and the terrifying commencement of the spiritual one. The family, supported by their chosen priests, bypassed the initial skepticism of the diocesan hierarchy and successfully appealed to Bishop Joseph Stangl of Würzburg. Under the ancient, solemn authority of the Catholic Church, Bishop Stangl granted the rare and specific authorization for the asterisk Rose's Exorcismus asterisk, the major exorcism as detailed in the asterisk Ritual Romanum asterisk of 1614. This sanction, this single, devastating authorization, sealed Anneliese's fate. It stripped away her remaining defenses and delivered her into the hands of a ceremony designed not for treatment, but for combat. The prescription bottles were set aside, the psychiatric appointments cancelled. In their place, heavy reliance was placed upon prayer, fasting, and the unrelenting power of sacred words. This was the terrifying point of no return, the moment when a medically complex, mentally deteriorating young woman officially became the focal point of a grueling, months-long spiritual battle that within a single calendar year would ultimately lead to her horrifying death. The stage was set in that claustrophobic, dark Bavarian home for the commencement of 42 recorded horrifying sessions of sustained spiritual warfare, a process that would systematically dismantle Anneliese's body and soul until only an empty shell remained silent at last. The true chronicle of the Exorcism Sessions themselves, the names of the supposed demons revealed, the agonizing physical toll taken, the specific religious rationalizations used to justify the complete deprivation of food and water, and the subsequent legal reckoning that followed the gruesome discovery of her corpse, is yet to be unveiled. horrors of what happened between September 1975 and July 1976 are preserved in chilling detail. Documented on 75 audio cassette tapes that chronicled the descent into madness and death. Prepare now to face the relentless reality of the rituals and the ultimate shocking consequence of such fanatical adherence. The Chamber of Torment, once a makeshift altar of desperate hope, became a crucible of ceaseless agony. By the spring of 1976, the Rachabola ritual had been performed over 50 times, often 4 or 5 hours straight, multiple days a week. The air in the Michel home in Klingenberg was thick, not with incense or sanctity, but with the miasma of decay, sweat, and the metallic tang of dried blood from self-inflicted wounds. The physical decline of Anneliese Michel had surpassed mere illness. It was a visible, agonizing erosion of the human form, witnessed and logged by the very men tasked with her spiritual liberation. The audio tapes, the terrifying artifacts that would later seal the fates of those involved, preserved the dreadful reality of this protracted siege. They captured not the gentle prayers of a penitent, but a cacophony of guttural snarls, impossible shrieks, and mocking theological debates voiced in languages Anneliese had never formally studied. Lucifer, Judas Iscariot, Nero, Cain, and the disgraced priest Fleischmann, these entities allegedly fought with venomous glee against the determined, though clearly exhausted, priests, Father Ernst Out and Father Arnold Renz. Yet as the purported spiritual battle seemed to turn in the priest's favor, the corporeal shell housing the conflict began to collapse with alarming speed. The priests, convinced they were nearing the final expulsion, intensified the sessions, viewing the suffering not as a medical emergency, but as the final, violent resistance of the infernal squatters. They had traded penicillin for prayer, nutrients for the nunc dimittis. The logs documenting the sessions reveal escalating levels of brutality, self-imposed or otherwise. Anneliese's fixation on penance led her to perform hundreds of prostrations and genuflections, rituals that required her to violently strike her knees against the stone floor until the joints were shattered and weeping. She refused sustenance, claiming the demons forbade her to eat, or that her starvation was necessary atonement for the failings of youth. Her frail body, already ravaged by years of epilepsy and psychosis, began to cannibalize itself. Her eyes, once luminous, sank deep into orbits rimmed with dark shadows, mirroring the exhaustion that haunted her parents, Joseph and Anna Michel. Her skin stretched taut over sharp bone, bruised and covered in deep bed sores resulting from lying immobile on the hard floor. The horror was meticulous and incremental. By June, Anneliese could barely walk. She was chained to her bed at night, not to restrain the demons, but to prevent her from harming herself further, a stark admission of the failure to protect her basic human safety. Her voice, when the demons released control, was a rasping whisper, often asking for release, for death, or for the Eucharist, which she would immediately vomit back up in spasms of alleged demonic repulsion. The open loops surrounding the church's involvement tightened into a knot of irreversible culpability. Were the priests operating under a blind faith in the medieval ritual, or had the intense pressure from the grieving family and the desperation of the local bishop overridden common sense and basic pastoral care? The recordings, which lasted up until days before her death, indicate a singular, terrifying focus. The priests believed they were performing a necessary act of spiritual war. The belief in the asterisk, great pardon asterisk, a mystical release that Anneliese allegedly sought through her suffering became the final, terrible rationale for allowing her suffering to continue unabated. The escalation in the final weeks was agonizingly documented. She contracted pneumonia, a fatal complication for a body reduced to skin and bone. Her limbs became paralyzed due to the extreme wasting of muscle mass. She refused water, the final fatal act of attrition. The family witnesses to this excruciating slow-motion death had crossed a moral threshold, becoming accomplices to the erosion of their own daughter's life, convinced they were facilitating her spiritual salvation. They could have called a doctor, demanded hospitalization, but the fear of interrupting the divine process, the deep-seated fear of eternal damnation, paralyzed them into catastrophic inaction. The re-engagement point is the final week of June 1976. The recordings grow fainter, punctuated by wheezing and labored breath. The demons' voices, once robust and theatrical, seemed almost weary, as if the host body could no longer sustain their vocal pyrotechnics. On June 30th, Anneliese spoke her last clear words to Father Renz. "Please, Father, pray for me," followed by a chilling plea to her mother. "Mother, I am afraid." These were the final, desperate cries of the human being trapped beneath the theological rubble. July 1st, 1976. The silence was absolute. Anneliese Michel was found dead in her bed. She weighed a mere 68 pounds, approximately 31 kilograms. Her body was a roadmap of suffering. Deep pressure sores, contusions, and the skeletal frame indicating severe, prolonged starvation and dehydration. The cause of death was officially ruled as dehydration and malnutrition. The subsequent shockwave was immediate and devastating. The police were notified, and the meticulous collection of evidence began. The Klingenberg house, which had been consecrated as a battleground, became a crime scene. The central conflict, faith versus legality, erupted into a furious national debate. The public outcry demanded accountability, forcing the authorities to treat the spiritual advisors and the family not as victims of spiritual deception, but as perpetrators of negligent homicide. The state prosecutor's office in Aschaffenburg prepared its case against Joseph and Anna Michel and the two priests, Father Alt and Father Renz. The core of the prosecution's argument rested not on the existence of demons, but on the indisputable facts of the physical body. Exhibit A: the horrific weight chart tracking Anneliese's decay. Exhibit B: the 90-minute excerpts from the audio tapes played in the courtroom, forcing the jury and the public to confront the actual sounds of the suffering, the shrieks, the thuds of the collapsing body and the priests. Calm responses confirming their active participation in the ritual's destructive progress. The defense was audacious and simple, a plea of spiritual immunity. They argued that because the church had formally authorized the exorcism, a fact that implicated Bishop Stangl, though he was never charged, the actions were protected by religious freedom. They insisted that Anneliese was not simply ill, but possessed asterisk, and that her death was a tragic, unavoidable consequence of the spiritual warfare waged against her. The court was forced to rule on whether the absolute belief in demonic possession superseded the legal obligation to preserve human life. The great revelation came in the court's judgment. It definitively rejected the defense of possession. The judges ruled that even within the framework of religious belief, the defendants had crossed the line into actionable negligence. They were legally obligated to call a physician when Anneliese's condition deteriorated to life-threatening levels. Their failure to do so, driven by fanatical adherence to a ritual, constituted negligent homicide. In 1978, the four defendants, the parents and the two priests, were found guilty of negligent homicide. The sentencing was symbolic but profoundly significant. 6 months in prison, suspended with 3 years probation. The judgment was designed to send a clear message. In the modern state, belief does not grant immunity from the laws protecting life. Anneliese Michel's death became a chilling case study, a horrifying synthesis of medieval fervor and modern medical failure. The subsequent scrutiny forced the Vatican to re-evaluate its guidelines, leading to the eventual revision of the Ritual Romanum *, the official handbook for exorcism, in 1999, mandating psychological evaluations before any ritual could commence. Despite the legal verdict, the religious narrative persisted. Anneliese's grave in Klingenberg remains a site of pilgrimage for those who believe she was a martyr, a saint who paid the ultimate price to prove the devil's reality. The true horror, however, lies not in the theological implications, but in the devastating human consequences. A young woman failed first by science, then deliberately starved by those who loved her most, all under the guise of salvation. Her story is a permanent scar on the intersection of faith, medicine, and human responsibility. The legacy of Anneliese Michel is a terrifying question mark etched into German legal history. We are left to confront the haunting audio tapes and the skeletal photograph of her final resting state, asking, where does devoted faith end and criminal neglect begin? And how many others must silently suffer when the desperate need for a spiritual miracle blinds us to the immediate, fatal requirements of the human body? Help our channel grow. Did these stories send chills down your spine? If you enjoyed these terrifying tales, please help us reach more horror fans. Like this video if it gave you goosebumps. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more spine-tingling stories. Comment below, which story scared you the most? Share with friends who love a good scare.